There's a weapon that has been carried into nearly every American ground combat operation since the mid-1980s. A weapon that soldiers have both cursed and credited with saving their lives in the same breath. A weapon whose adoption was so politically messy, so bureaucratically ugly, and so riddled with compromise that the Army very nearly chose a different gun entirely, and some veterans still argue they should have. This is the untold story of the M249 Squad Automatic Weapon, and the story doesn't begin in America at all. It begins in Belgium, in the post-war engineering culture of Fabrique Nationale d'Armes de Guerre, the weapons manufacturer the world knows simply as FN. By the late 1960s, FN's chief weapons designer, Ernest Verviers, was developing a new concept in light machine gun design. The goal was ambitious: a weapon light enough for a single infantryman to carry and operate without a dedicated crew, yet capable of delivering the sustained, suppressive fire that had previously required a 2- or 3-man team. Verviers called his creation the Minimi, a contraction of the French phrase for light machine gun. It was chambered for the newly standardized 5.56 mm NATO cartridge, weighed just under 15 pounds loaded, and could be fed either from a disintegrating link belt or directly from a standard NATO Stanag magazine. That last feature, the dual feed system, was a stroke of practical genius that would prove central to the weapon's eventual American adoption. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the United States Army was quietly recognizing a serious gap in its infantry firepower doctrine. The problem had been building for years. In Vietnam, American rifle squads relied on the M60 general-purpose machine gun for automatic firepower. The M60 was a formidable weapon, powerful, reliable enough in controlled conditions, and capable of reaching out to 800 meters or more. But it was also heavy, crew-dependent, and chambered in 7.62 mm NATO, a full-power rifle cartridge that limited how much ammunition a soldier could realistically carry. As infantry doctrine evolved in the 1970s toward smaller, faster-moving units operating with greater independence, military planners began pushing for a lighter automatic weapon that could be issued at the squad level rather than the platoon level. Every squad, in theory, should have its own source of sustained automatic fire. The M60 couldn't fill that role. It was too heavy, too slow to maneuver with, and too ammunition-hungry for a single soldier to sustain alone. The Army's answer was to launch one of the most competitive and contentious small arms trials in its post-World War II history, a program called the Squad Automatic Weapon Competition. Multiple nations submitted designs. The American submission came from Mermont Corporation, which produced a design called the XM106. West Germany submitted a version of the Heckler & Koch HK-13, and Belgium submitted the FN Minimi. The trials were grueling, running through tens of thousands of rounds of testing across multiple environments and evaluating everything from accuracy and reliability to maintainability and soldier ergonomics. What happened next is the part most conventional histories gloss over. The XM106, the American-designed entry, was eliminated early. Its reliability numbers simply didn't compete. The HK-13 performed respectably but couldn't match the Minimi's feed system flexibility or its ability to handle the abuse of sustained automatic fire without degrading in accuracy. Round after round of testing, the Minimi consistently outperformed its competition. By 1980, the Army's evaluators knew what their data was telling them. The United States military needed to adopt a Belgian gun. And in the political climate of the early 1980s, with American manufacturing employment a hot-button issue and the defense industry under congressional scrutiny, that conclusion was not going to be welcomed on Capitol Hill. The debate that followed was fierce and largely invisible to the public. Congressional pressure pushed for domestic production requirements. FN responded by establishing manufacturing operations in Columbia, South Carolina, a move that allowed the government to technically classify the weapon as domestically produced, while the design, the tooling, and the institutional knowledge remained Belgian. In 1982, the Army formally adopted the weapon as the M249 Squad Automatic Weapon. The designation was American. The soul of the gun was entirely from Liège. What the Army got for its money was a genuinely revolutionary infantry weapon. The M249 fires the 5.56 millimeter NATO cartridge at a cyclic rate of approximately 700 to 850 rounds per minute from an open bolt configuration that prevents heat buildup from causing cook-offs during sustained fire. Its quick change barrel system, a feature that allowed a trained gunner to swap out an overheated barrel in under 10 seconds without tools, was a significant advance over the M60, which required more time and an exposed hot barrel handle that burned through gloves. The Minimi's design allowed left or right-hand ejection through a simple mechanical conversion, and its folding bipod gave it stable supported fire from the prone position without requiring a full tripod setup. The dual-feed system deserves particular attention because it solved a real combat problem that competing designs simply ignored. The M249 can accept ammunition either from a 200 round disintegrating link belt in a plastic drum attached beneath the receiver, or directly from any standard M16 pattern 30 round Stanag magazine inserted into a port on the left side of the weapon. In combat, this means a gunner who burns through his belt ammunition can immediately grab magazines from any rifleman in his squad and keep firing. He's never dependent on a dedicated ammunition carrier reaching him in time. That interoperability, the ability to draw from the entire squad's ammunition supply, was something no previous American squad automatic weapon had offered. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, the magazine feed function turned out to be one of the weapon's most persistent real-world vulnerabilities. American soldiers who carried the M249 in combat from the Persian Gulf in 1991 to the streets of Mogadishu in 1993 to the mountains of Afghanistan and the cities of Iraq through the 2000s developed a complicated relationship with the weapon. On one hand, the M249's firepower was undeniable. In the hands of a trained gunner, it could suppress enemy positions across an entire block, keep heads down during squad maneuver, and deliver a volume of accurate fire that no rifleman with an M16 or M4 could approach. The psychological effect of its sustained fire on enemy combatants was documented repeatedly by after-action reports from multiple theaters. On the other hand, the complaints were consistent and serious. The M249's magazine feed function, the theoretical ace in the hole, proved chronically unreliable in practice. Magazines seated in the port had a tendency to cause feeding failures, particularly when the weapon was hot or dirty. Most experienced M249 gunners simply stopped using the magazine port entirely and relied exclusively on belt ammunition, which somewhat defeated the purpose of including the system in the first place. In the fine sand and grit of Iraq and Afghanistan, the weapon's open-bolt design, which left the chamber and feedway exposed during the between-shot cycle, made it more vulnerable to contamination than the closed-bolt M4S that riflemen carried beside it. Soldiers who deployed to both theaters reported spending disproportionate maintenance time keeping their M249S running compared to their fellow soldiers maintaining M4 carbines. The weight issue was perhaps the most operationally significant limitation. The original M249 weighed about 15.5 pounds empty. With a full 200 round box of linked ammunition, a gunner was carrying close to 22 pounds in the weapon alone before accounting for personal armor, water, food, radio equipment, and the additional belt ammunition most gunners carried to supplement their basic load. In the mountain terrain of eastern Afghanistan, where patrols regularly covered miles of altitude gain on foot, the M249's weight became a genuine tactical burden. Special operations units, whose operational requirements demanded faster movement and more selective engagements, largely moved away from the M249 in favor of lighter options. The Army responded to sustained operator feedback with a series of modifications and variants. The Para model, a shortened, lighter version with a collapsing stock designed for airborne and vehicle crews, addressed some mobility concerns but also reduced the weapon's effective suppression capability. The M249 SPW, or Special Purpose Weapon, was developed specifically for special operations use, stripping weight from the design by removing the carry handle, bipod, and heat shield, creating a lighter but more austere package. Neither variant fully satisfied the operators who used them, and the search for better solutions continued in parallel to the M249 service life. What the historical record shows, and what rarely gets acknowledged in the sanitized official accounts, is that the M249 service life was essentially a running argument between the weapon's genuine strengths and its persistent operational shortcomings. The Army knew from the beginning, from the earliest feedback out of training cycles, and then from actual combat reports, that the weapon had reliability and maintenance issues that a more conservative procurement process would have addressed before fielding rather than after. But the institutional pressure to field something, to close the squad automatic weapon capability gap that Vietnam-era doctrine had exposed, drove a timeline that left soldiers working around a weapon's problems rather than starting with a weapon that didn't have them. The untold thread running through the M249's history is how it shaped the entire next generation of American squad-level automatic weapons thinking. The M249's documented shortcomings drove a requirement that eventually produced the M27 Infantry automatic rifle, a different conceptual approach that trades the M249's raw volume of fire for a lighter, more reliable, closed-bolt platform. The Marine Corps, which accumulated particularly extensive M249 combat experience in Fallujah and Ramadi, was the service branch that pushed hardest for an alternative, and the M27 emerged directly from that pressure. The Army, meanwhile, has been evaluating the M250, a next-generation machine gun, chambered for the new 6.8 mm common cartridge, as part of the next-generation squad weapon program, a program that would not exist in its current form without the specific lessons the M249 taught over 4 decades of combat use. None of this diminishes what the M249 actually accomplished. In Mogadishu in October of 1993, M249 gunners provided fire support during one of the most intense urban firefights American soldiers had experienced since Vietnam. In Fallujah in 2004, the weapon's sustained fire capability was credited in multiple after-action reports as a decisive factor in close-quarters street fighting that overwhelmed lighter-armed opponents. In hundreds of ambushes and contact engagements across Afghanistan, the M249 gave squad-level commanders an automatic fire capability that genuinely changed tactical outcomes. More than 40 years after its adoption, the M249 remains in active American military service. Its production history, manufacturing improvements, and combat modifications represent one of the longest continuous small arms development cycles in modern American military history. The gun that was almost never adopted, the Belgian design that survived congressional politics, manufacturing nationalism, and decades of operator complaints, has outlasted most of the debates about whether it should have been chosen in the first place. The M249 story is ultimately a story about the gap between what a weapon looks like on paper and what it becomes in the hands of soldiers operating in conditions no test range ever fully replicates. It's a story about the institutional inertia of military procurement, the political realities that shape defense acquisitions, and the extraordinary adaptability of the men and women who carry weapons into combat regardless of whether those weapons are perfect. The M249 was never perfect, but in the history of American infantry combat, it was there every time, in every theater, in every condition, and that, in the end, is what gets remembered.